Okay, we are live. Hey, I'm David Brownstein. Welcome to the 2020 Music Industry Evolution Summit. My guest today is Mike Meiers. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, thank you, David. I'm happy to be here.
Cool. Really glad to be here with you, and I'm glad you brought some guitars today.
I did. I brought several guitars, and God knows I'll probably get a lot more.
That's great. That's great. You can never have too many guitars, said the
No.
guitar player. Um, Today, our subject is going to be all things guitar, or a certain number of things guitar. Guitar is the word of the day. But let me start with, what was the first guitar player that inspired you to learn how to play and to start as a guitar? Yeah, what inspired you to start playing guitar?
Ooh, that is a good question. For me, I think there's a lot of different artists, growing up, because, when you're a kid, you're surrounded by all the music your parents listen to. And I remember, my parents listened to, I had Beach Boy records and Beatles records. I remember the White Album the most because that was a lot of artwork, and I would always like skim through that and I would see them playing. I think for me, when I decided, because I was kind of a late bloomer, I think, for guitar. I got a guitar first year of high school, but it was so hard, or I like to think I didn't have a reason of why I wanted to play guitar, so it sat in my closet. But then I started listening to all these punk bands, and every band that I saw, there was one in particular that I was really into growing up. They were called the Mr. T Experience. And they were and it was like straightforward punk rock, not a lot of crazy chords. But I was just, this is so, I need to learn. And I think, if I really go into it, I think them, and definitely that whole kind of like punk rock scene. I remember Dookie, Green Day, really early on, probably was an album that I played for years, but always seeing those images of Billy Joe playing guitar was stuck in my head, so that eventually once I did, I was like, oh, this is not just something I'm going to play, but this is something for writing songs. That's why, because that was the whole reason of why I ended up wanting to do it, because it was being in a band. That's, this is why I need a guitar.
So
I
you
can't do
wanted
it,
did you want to be in a band before you wanted to play guitar?
You know what? But I didn't, not yet. I wanted to play guitar, and I'm not sure why, because I thought I did piano for the longest time, and I was like, I want to do guitar, but then I just didn't. But once I had the reason to be in a band, that just was like, cool. Then I picked up the guitar, and I remember my senior year being like, everybody talks about my senior year was hard of studying and getting ready for college. I did zero of that. It was all guitar. I think I did. I barely got through my senior year because I think the majority of it was coming home and just grabbing my guitar and just playing it, because I was like, if I'm going to be in a band, I have to start playing a whole bunch. And I just records
Right,
and doing as
right.
much as I could.
I got so excited seeing all your guitars that I forgot to read your bio.
That's okay.
So I'm gonna do that now since I've got it right here. So,
Okay.
Mike, welcome, Mike Meiers. Mike Meiers is a songwriter, producer, teacher, and full-time coffee drinker. Music has been his life, from playing piano at the age of 6 to spending the majority of his 20s touring an independent pop rock band, My Cardboard Spaceship Adventure. That is one of the great names, right up there with the
Thank
Mr. T experience. That's great. After band life, he committed to teaching others and pursuing a professional songwriting career. Since then, he's been a co-writer for many projects and had multiple placements. And I'm so excited to have you here to talk about guitar. I really wanted to bring guitar into the Summit mix because it's becoming a sound that's coming back in vogue again, and everyone's got guitar samples on their contact players and their loop players, but um, guitar, guitar, guitar. If we turned the camera around in my room, all my guitars would be visible. So I'm the same way. So our topic today is really going to be focused around what do guitar playing as a songwriting tool, as a songwriting adventure. And I know your specialty is teaching guitar for songwriters. So this session today is not just for guitar players to learn how to play like, somebody special, somebody unique, but how to bring guitar into your songwriting sessions, how to be a better guitar player so you can write songs in the room, something like that. How did that come about for you? What inspired you to start focusing on that?
Well, I think it was cool because, you know, we get these bits and pieces that we do in life and we're like, I wonder what this means. And then over time, they kind of all slowly start to assemble. So, you know, as you were reading my bit, I knew guitar through just really one lens, and that was through playing in my pop punk band. That was what we did. We put out pop punk records. We did tours. We opened for people that were in our genre. We did the Warped Tour thing. We did the East Coast independent tours and Midwest. And that was basically how I saw guitar. It was like through one lens, essentially, and it was pop punk. And then once, at like all bands, eventually they die down, and then you find yourself kind of in the ashes of just like, well, what do I do? And
Now what do I do?
and it was just like one of those things where somebody who went to my show said, hey, my guitar teacher is looking to hire someone. Are you interested? And I was like, no. And then I thought about it because I realized I worked at a car wash, and I was like, chemicals guitar, chemicals guitar. So I
It's a
made
tough choice, right?
oh, it was, but eventually I went into it, and you know, I went into it not knowing. I was like, well, I don't know what I know about guitar. Um, but I discovered I knew a little bit more than I realized, but I also was exposed suddenly to so many different people, different walks of life, different age ranges, different purposes, that slowly wanted to learn different genres. I noticed I was just starting to absorb brand new songs, things that I didn't listen to, because again, I was in my box, and then suddenly I was like, I never listened to that. And I suddenly started to fall in love with like, God, I love Americana. And then suddenly, and I know for some people this may be a shock, and I think for teenage punk rock me, this was a shock. I was teaching like country pop and being like, God, I love this. And I was like, what? You know, young rebellious me would have been like, dude, it's not punk rock. But I was just suddenly falling in love with the style. And then I was
Yeah.
teaching top
What
40.
was it? What was it about pop that appealed to you as a guitar player, and
Sure.
what broke you out of your pop punk mode?
I found the hooks to be so, I found myself waking up the next day just being like, and I'm like, what is that song? And I was like, that was the one I was teaching yesterday. And like all guitar teachers, if you start to accumulate more and more students, you're going to see certain songs repeat. And then suddenly I was seeing like what was popular almost. I was gauging what was popular because I noticed if I was teaching these same songs over and over, I was like, oh, there's a reason why these songs are really hooky and why people are really loving them. And then so I was listening to maybe that top 40 song, not once, twice, but maybe I was listening to it like, you know, 30, 40, 50 times over and over and over. And so every time I listened to it, I challenged myself to listen to it in a different way, to understand. And I was, depending on the experience of the person I was teaching, we may have learned it a couple different ways. Maybe we picked out the melody on guitar, and then suddenly I was like, oh, they're only using like 3 or 4 notes in their melody during that verse. Oh, so about like 3 or 4 years into teaching, I was like, I made this bold declaration to myself. I want to start becoming a songwriter for other people and get my music into television. I had no idea how to or what, but it was just like one of those things. I just started saying to people, I'm a songwriter. And then in my head, I was like, now, how the hell do I do that? And so I
Yeah.
realized that opened up, you know, I continued to teach full time, but I started taking any class possible about songwriting, melodies, sync licensing, and I started going to conferences, networking, and then meeting a group of people that just seemed to work well. And I started co-writing. And as we start to do these co-writes, I noticed, especially when you do sync licensing, that you get briefs all over the sun. You know, we're looking for this that sounds like this. We are looking for this, looking for this. And so when we would do these writes, and it would say looking for insert the style, and we would start to write the song, and I'd be like, oh, it's like, you know, I think the vibe's kind of like this. And they'd be like, yes. How did you do that? And I was like, oh, well, in this artist, they use this, this, and this. And that's what's going to make up the, you know, I think that's the vibe they're trying to go for. And then I noticed
So you started to see the repetitions and the trends and the things, the stylistic things that were
all
common.
the little nuances of what made that song good and what was drawing your ear. And the challenge for us in the co-write was to recognize the nuances and then make it our own with our own set of hooks and make it strong and, you know, make it to stand on its own and start submitting it for our briefs. And then I noticed I started to get co-writers being like, hey, could you teach me a lesson or two on what, you know, how you do this thing? And I was like, sure. And then I realized over time, to the point that all my students pretty much were all songwriters. they were all songwriters that were just like, I don't feel confident about my guitar. How can I change this? Or how can I start to write in other genres? How can I start to understand it? And I realized, I think this is kind of how a majority of songwriters feel when they pick up their guitar. And I get it because I was the same way. I saw things through one lens and I realized I was so lucky to be stretched in a position when teaching to listen to so many different genres and so many different styles for, at this point, it's been going on year 10. So 10 years in, I've been exposed. I can tell you the trends of what 2012 looked like. And then suddenly here we are in 2020. And as you said, like, hey, I'm like, guitar's coming back. I'm noticing a little bit more in clever ways, but it's just cool to see just that change over time. But I've absorbed so much that is my goal, to make songwriters realize that it's what I'm doing is not a unique science, and it's not only one person can do this. You can do this as well if you start to understand some elements and some things that make these genres so unique and separate from other ones, so that when you're trying to write for country pop, folk Americana, indie rock, pop punk, that you start to understand what goes into it, that you have the abilities and the skills to comprise those genres yourself.
That's great. That's great. I mean, it seems that in the songwriting room, a little guitar goes a long way, right?
Yeah.
It's not about flash. I have some players, friends of mine, superior players. They don't get to show their chops much, but in the songwriting room, it's like, yeah, a little bit goes a long way. What are you going to say? Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, the little bit goes a long way, because I think the main job, if you're leading musically in a co-write, depending on the scenario, if you're choosing to, if it's the first time you're sitting down with a new artist and this is the first time you're meeting with them, your goal is to capture the vibe of what's in their head very quickly. That's the impression you're going to make. So a lot of artists, I don't think, are going to be impressed with, crazy solos, or that you can sweep arpeggio. It's like that, do sweep arpeggios. That's great. But like, if you give them a vibe of what they're thinking in their head, and you've done the research, and like, they're kind of like this, and they enjoy these artists, and they drop those little breadcrumbs, it's up to you to kind of catch them and try to assemble quickly a feel for them to lay the groundwork for that co-write, so that you got some stable footing to start out with. And if you can do that, you will find yourself making a good relationship with that artist, that co-writer, and just coming back over and over again, because they'll be like, so-and-so really knows how to set that tone and that vibe of that song.
Could you give an example maybe of some of the things you've extrapolated and just noticed, and about that they're maybe not, they're obvious in some level once you hear them, but not so obvious to everybody, that these things are teachable,
I like to think of, if you can think of 3 elements, and so I like to break it down this way. So the first one is voicing. Voicing, to me, in a non-techie, non-theory way, is simply a flavor and a feel. That's what you're trying to do. And there are different ways. A lot of people know open chords. That's kind of the way that they see guitar. And sometimes the problem is not necessarily the key or the set of chords that they have. They may be hitting the mark with the chords and the key that they're in, but the voicing just doesn't work. It feels clunky. It feels awkward. And if they're using those same open chords, it's just like, nope, that doesn't work, because maybe they're trying to aim for pop. But if they go for something that has an airier feel, that is comprised of a root and a third, think of the sound of like Blackbird, or the sound of like Thomas Rhett's Unforgettable, or Justin Bieber's Love Yourself. It has that sort of airy feel. Suddenly, oh, now if I take such and such chords in that key and use that particular voicing, melodically it seems to fit better now, and now sets up for maybe what the singer's singing, because you may stumble on the right singer's key and the chords, but that singer may hear those chords and be like, man, I'm really struggling to find a melody or where to start, because to them, they just hear clunky open chords, and the only thing they can think of is this one song that used open chords, and that's not melodically their style. But if you pull from another voicing, suddenly you're going to trigger all these other ideas in their brain that feels familiar, and suddenly they're throwing ideas at you, and you're like, yeah, and then you build out the song, instead of walking away with kind of a Frankenstein song where melodically maybe it feels a little poppy, but then the chords you listen to and you're like, oh, it feels a little disjointed, and it feels like it doesn't work. So I feel you can think of 4 basic shapes. Think of, you got your open chords, you've got your power chords, which you're going to find in kind of like that indie rock, that power pop, pop punk. You go to bar chords, and you can find bar chords stylistically in lots of different genres, but to me, bar chords are very proper. There's a big distinction between a power chord and a bar chord. A bar chord is like a Dijon mustard chord, very nice and fancy. A power chord is just like straight to the point. Give me my root and fifth. Something just really packs a punch. And a root and third is nice and airy, and it sounds light, and it sounds like I would hear a nice reverbed guitar, you know, with a little slapback delay that would be.
So when you say the bar chord, you mean like playing the whole six
Oh
strings?
yeah, like if I just grab my guitar right now
Yeah,
and I
great.
played you like 4 different ways to play G, and I was like, here's like an open chord, you know, or open chord. Here's a nice bar chord. Here's like a power chord. Here's a root and third. All of those were G, but the nuances between those 4 chords are just, that's what's the difference. And I think when we're not listening to that, sometimes it is the chord, but having those little differences, I think, go a long way in a right. And I think that starts to trigger a lot of things that we hear, because we're surrounded by so many songs that we hear constantly, and that if we can do little things to trick our brain and trigger it to think it's kind of like in this style and this feel, that's where we're going to come up with better melodies. That's where you're going to start to come up with melodies that aren't the same thing that you feel like you've just been regurgitating those same things over and over again. So to me, that's super important about voicings.
Well, no, that's beautiful. One of the things I've learned when I've been producing artists, writing with artists, is I'm primarily a guitar player.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm doing a pop thing with somebody, I will play, you know, chug, chug, chug. And I think, but I'm hearing synth going dot, 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 dot. But they're hearing that I'm playing AC/DC. And I'm like, they go, no, I don't want a rock thing. And in my mind, it's not that, but that's clearly what I'm playing. And that's clearly what they're hearing.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing too. Sometimes I'm using the guitar to lead in a co-write that's pop, that there may be 0 guitar that ends up being recorded, but the way that we're writing the song right now is dependent on the vibe and the feel that I can give. So if I can think in my head, okay, I think I know what it's going to sound like. Can I try to replicate and give it that feel? That's all you're trying to do, even if you're not going to use the guitar at all in the song. You're trying to just trick that other writer to feeling that genre, that style, so that they can start to get in the zone, and that their role, whatever it may be, they feel confident, they've got an idea of where the song's going.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Who are some examples of artists now, or writers or producers now, who are using, where you see guitars sort of bringing it back into the foreground of maybe pop or country? I mean, country has always been more of a guitar zone,
Oh
but
yeah.
in the pop world, or I don't know, where do you see some surprising areas or new areas or just great areas where guitar is coming back in?
Oh, I think anything that Butch Walker does, because I think
Yeah.
Butch Walker has been by far one of the most versatile producers out there. And for people that don't know Butch Walker, he was, a band guy for so long. He was in a hair metal band, and eventually that morphed into different bands. And in the late 90s, 2000s, he was in a band called the Marvelous Three.
Yeah, I love
And they
Marvelous
had,
Three.
yeah, and they had a hit song that was oh shoot, what was it? Freak of the Week. That's what it was. Freak of the
Yeah.
Week was a hit song. And then eventually, like, again, it just didn't happen. It kind of died out, and new wave metal kind of took over, and they kind of fade in the background. But then he ended up being a producer, because he wrote that song, he produced that song. And so he started to go in the realm with different artists that were like more teen oriented, like Avril Lavigne. And then I think he did the Hillary Duff. You did one, but then eventually he went into some more other, like, more pop. He did things. I think he's done stuff with Fall Out Boy, Panic at the Disco.
Yeah.
He just did the Green Day record. He's doing a Jewel record. So variations where guitar has been production-wise. I always look at Butch, because some of the ones, particularly like Panic at the Disco, that's primarily more pop, he's done it in ways that have been clever and hooky. Things like Fall Out Boy, which is a mixture of rock and pop, especially now. Fall Out Boy has definitely leaned a lot more towards the pop side of things. I always look at that. Ross Gollin, as a songwriter, is another guy. He has a podcast called And the Writer Is.
Oh yeah.
He's definitely, he's worked with Demi Lovato, let's see, Keith Urban, Michael Bublé, 5 Seconds of Summer. Just, that's another guy. And when it comes to country, Ross
So
Copperman. Yeah.
does Ross go on and write on guitar primarily?
Probably guitar and piano. He's definitely, I know
Mm-hmm.
he's multi-instrument and just a very multifaceted songwriter. Those are people that I'm always interested in, that just seem like they don't wear one hat. They're just
Mm-hmm.
constantly wearing multiple ones. I don't know if you know Greg Wells, another great
Oh
producer.
yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
so,
I did a mixing course with him this past year. Awesome.
oh, I just, he's another guy that's just like, I think the term jack of all trades just
Yeah.
hits him, because he's a fantastic player in everything.
Yeah, piano, guitar, drums, voice.
Drums, bass, just like
He's
everything, orchestration. And I'm just like, oh, I feel like I
yeah.
need to lock myself in my room and just practice for another
I,
20 years.
yeah, if it would be great if we could all somehow get a little dollop of Greg Wells in us. So any other, like, what are some maybe recommendations for, I mean, at what level do people have to be in their guitar playing to take it to the next level to be a better songwriting guitar player?
Sure. So I think the first thing is, it's weird. The first thing I tell anyone before we even delve into things, you gotta believe that you're capable of doing it. I know when I say that, some people roll their eyes because they're like, oh, is it a cheesy motivational thing? It's like, no, it's after teaching for so long, when people get real and they share things, and I realize a lot of people are there's they're not confident in their ability, because when you ask them, do you think you're capable of doing it? I hear like, well, I'm not really a guitar. I'm not really. And it just goes down a
Hmm.
notch,
Hmm.
down a notch, down a notch. And where I started is like, you have to believe that you're capable of doing it. I remember being, when I didn't know guitar yet, but I had my guitar and I was like maybe like 16 and I was about to start lessons. I would play the song and I would pretend to play. That was me just pretending to play, even though I had
Hmm.
no idea what I was doing. It was just the visualization for me, like one day you could play a song for people, one
Hmm.
day you could
Hmm.
be on the stage for people. Like, I had to just believe for a second that I was capable, because anything that's going to hit you guitar wise, that you have to work at technique wise, that you have to level up on your ability, you kind of have to dig your heels in, and it's work. It and it will work if you believe you're capable of doing it. I find that when you could have the best teacher around that gives you all the top skills, but if at the end of the day you're like, I'm just not capable of doing it, you then you won't. You have to believe that you are absolutely capable of doing it. And every time I meet a songwriter that says that, I'm like, you are. You have to believe that you're capable. So the first thing is mentality. You got to switch the things that you're saying. So if you say right now, I'm not really a guitarist, I'm a songwriter, but I'm not that good at guitar, just change to, I'm a songwriter, and you know, I'm learning to get better at the guitar. It seems so small, but the things that we say and the words that we drop, really we absorb. So we got to watch the language. So it's just those.
I've heard songwriters at like open circles, songwriter circles go, well, I'm not really a guitar player, but I play songwriter guitar, and then I wrote this hit song on my songwriter guitar, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so it's a way of giving permission. Is like I'm not somebody else, but I am me. It's funny. What you're reminding me of. What's interesting about the punk world is a lot of people just decide I'm gonna I don't play anything, but I want to be in a punk band, and they just go out and do it with complete abandon and self-belief, with no reason to believe it whatsoever, and it's great, and it gets them to a certain place, and then at a certain point they go, well, I'm this, but I'm not that. It's interesting where a certain amount of naivete gets them into the game, and then people can be limited by like, well, I'm not that, I'm not this, I'm not that, you know.
It's absolutely true. And I think of, like, think of a little kid when he says, I'm going to be this one day. He could be, but usually what stops him from thinking that is when somebody says, I don't think you're capable of it. And
Mm-hmm.
immediately they go, well, maybe I'm not. And what I find is a lot of people that want to say they're good at guitar tell me a story of, like, I remember playing guitar, and then this one person said, you didn't really sound that good. And so what's been playing in their head constantly is just that person being like, you didn't sound that good. You didn't sound that. And it's just on repeat. And so we've got to just like stop that and realize, cool, don't worry about that. You are capable. So the first thing is mentality. The next thing is you have to be open to new genres and new styles, regardless of what you write. Because I find, everybody, whatever decade you grew up in, and I get it, you really love that genre. You absorb it because it's a moment when you were making decisions of like, this is what I like.
This is who I
And this
am.
is
Yeah,
my
yeah,
genre. And
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
like, and you relate to life moments. I remember being in high school and she broke up with me and this album got me and it transformed me. But what we need to watch is a lot of what you play is that decade just comes through blaringly. And so I've had people that have sat down that don't have to tell me what style or what band influenced them. I can listen to their song. I remember one guy, he sat down, he was like, I want to play some songs. I was like, go ahead. And he played me some songs and they were great. And I was like, do you like the Goo Goo Dolls a lot? And he was like, dude, how'd you know? That band transformed, and then gave me a story. It was like, if it's very obvious. So it's
Yeah,
okay. It's, don't get me wrong, I still listen to tons of my punk records, but
yeah,
I
totally.
can tell you I'm updating my playlist constantly of new things, of new songs that are coming out. Because if I don't, I'm going to fall backwards if I'm not staying up to date. Even if it doesn't have guitar, I'm going to pick up my guitar and I'm going to spot out the melody on guitar. I'm going to watch what's happening. I'm going to try to break down the chord structure on my guitar. I'm going to try to absorb as much as I can so that when I walk into a write, if somebody drops that song, I'm just not like, have you guys ever heard of the Mr. T Experience? Because let me play you all the songs from this discography that I learned when I was in high school. So the first thing is being open to new genres and new styles. And where I find people do well is when they just have that door open and they're just willing to accept that. The ones that close that door, that's the ones that usually people are like, they're nice, but they're really kind of stuck in what they like. And that's cool. So you have to define what you're trying to do with your songwriting. If your goal is to write for other artists and other people, and you want to get into sync licensing and you want to get into those realms, you have to have that door open. And then I think, we talked about knowing voicings. There are other things that I would say too are very important. And I would put this at, I probably talk about this more than, I'd probably say the same amount as the voicings. And that would be, you got to embrace the metronome. The metronome, I think, is the most hated and vile thing. If anything could unite people, it's just the loathing of the metronome, because they're like, oh, it's so annoying. But a lot of people are rhythmically inconsistent. A lot of people are all over the board. The parts you know really well, you soar and you play it so fast, but that part you don't know well, it dips down,
Right.
and you're taking your co-writer on this up and down. It's like driving someone that's learning how to drive with a stick shift for the first time. You get your stops and your starts and you're just like, oh. So the metronome is really to hone out, just because I find in my co-writes when we sit down, if the singer's singing a particular tempo and the things we're talking about, like, okay, so where are we going to record it at? And somebody pulls out a metronome and taps it out and hits play, and they go, could you play that chorus for me? And they're going to sing it. I better be able to play along to that chorus with the metronome and be able to play, keep in time, but also not play like a robot. I need to
Right.
keep that human element and that human feel. So I
So
feel
what's your take on what's your advice, or how do you approach getting better at locking in with the click or with the metronome?
You can do. We are in an age that I wish I had when I started guitar. Everybody has GarageBand on their phones, on their iPads, on their laptops. All you have to do is just pull up a slow. I feel an entryway to the metronome is pull up a drummer, choose a low setting. I would never choose more than like 60 or 70 BPM, and start with a simple drum pattern like kick snare. Usually the kick is on the 1 and 3, snare is in on the 2 and 4, and your hi-hat's going 1 and 2 and 3. And take a basic chord progression, something you feel comfortable with, and start strumming with it. And slowly making that part of it. It has to be routine. So if you're judging off the first, 2 or 3 times you try with the metronome, it's going to bomb. It's not going to be good. It's going to be, and you're going to be like, I remember one student once told me, I think the metronome's off. And it just made me laugh because I was like,
Actually,
yeah,
it's
the
not.
metronome's off. But to me, if you can start by just like, it's almost like a drummer's in the room with you saying, hey man, I'm going to play a beat and I just want you to play some chords. But you just loop that drum around and you just start playing it. And then as you start to feel more comfortable, then click that little back and forth metronome and add it in. And then once you start to feel a little bit more confident, mute that drum and just listen to that single solitary metronome. Can you count to that metronome 3 different ways? Can you count to it like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. Because if you can start to do that, the goal is not to necessarily play to the metronome in your right, but when you sit down with your right and you start comprising your strumming patterns and you start comprising your chords, if there's strumming, if there's plucking, that you are going to be more in time than necessarily someone that doesn't practice with a metronome. I can spot it out. Like you said, at a writer's round, there's so many great writers that are out there that have these such good songs, but the way they're presenting it is on their guitar has no dynamics, so it just feels like it's one volume. And I am just taken on this journey of consistency strumming wise that I'm like, if they just would have just done those little things, that song would have been killer. And it probably is a killer song. You give it to someone else that maybe is understanding the nuances and feels a little bit more confident, probably is a kick-ass song. But those things right there, that metronome is a huge game changer, especially if you want to say, I want to be a professional songwriter.
Right.
You may find yourself in studio, somebody saying like, hey, can you lay down this really quick for a work tape? And if they throw on that metronome and you're sweating bullets being like, I've never done this before.
Right.
You don't want to be in that position. And I know what position that feels like, because I remember my band going in when we were just like, a bunch of snotty-nosed little punks. And then they were like, what's the BPM? And we were like, who's the what's-its? What's that? And then not playing to a metronome for 3 songs. It was a nightmare because they were a weird count. And they were like, okay, so you got to count to 5, make the 4 a little quicker. And then that's when the chorus starts. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then just like, you don't want to worry about that. So the metronome's a really big thing right there. That's a way that people can start adding it into a practice.
Now, that's a great idea. I mean, to practice playing to a metronome, or practice playing to a click, or practice playing to a drum loop. How do you approach guitar players in practice in general these days? What's the amount of practice, or what's your take on practice?
Well, for me, consistency over, consistency is definitely the thing that I drive home the most. So it can vary from what people want to do. Sometimes people are tell me, I want to be a session player. Some people are like, I just want to be a songwriter. What I say, you have to carve out consistent time throughout your day, just like you would to eat dinner, lunch, when you're going to go to sleep. You've got to cut a consistent amount of time. I would rather somebody tell me, hey, Mike, I practice consistently 20 minutes every day for the next year than telling me, hey, Mike, I practiced an hour 3 times a week. Because that doesn't really do it. Those are steroid practices that make us feel good, and we get to say, like, I played an hour. But usually it's not a productive practice. The first 15 minutes, kind of. Next 15 minutes, eh. And then the next half an hour, we're just hanging on by a thread to be like, okay, and timeout. But if you come to, for instance, if somebody said to me, I'm not very good with a percussive sound. And for people that are sitting there, well, what kind of sound is that? If I grab my guitar and I was like, something that had like a groove, a little swing and a right, and they didn't feel good at, I'd be like, hey, guess what? Focus on that one thing for the next 3 weeks. If you were to hone in, sometimes people are juggling too much in their practice routines, and they're dabbling all over the place. And the problem is, when you dabble, it's okay, but you don't really get better. You just kind of dabble a little bit here and there. When you laser focus on one thing at a time and give it the attention that it needs, you knock out a lot more. And when we, sit down in, mentoring sessions, and I give them like an itemized checklist of like, this is what we're going to do in the next, 2 weeks. And this is what your list needs to look like, and the time that you set. And this is what needs to be consistency and just focusing on one specific thing. So you need to think about, what is my end goal that I want to do with this? And then work backwards. What does that look like, 5 years from now, a year from now, 6 months from now, from now, to basically where you get down to that first step, where it's like, cool, what's the tangible step that I can take right now? Everybody usually thinks about step 37 when they're on step 2. And I'm usually like, and I'm just like, it's like, don't worry about step 37. When we get to 37, we'll talk about 37. You're on step 2 right now. Let's just stick right there and work with that.
That's great. That's really great.
Yeah.
So before we just talk about what your free gift download is going to be today, anything else that you want to say that we didn't get to, or you want to mention?
I think we are probably right now, we're in the weirdest time for musicians, I think, and songwriters, because it's, you know, a lot of us are honing, but it's also the best time at the same. I find a lot of people have been saying, like, I wish I had, you know, a chance to do this. I wish I had a chance to do this. But now is the time. So it's so many, it's all the people who've been interviewing, like, you know, you got Chris Bradley on here, which she teaches musicians. Yeah, you can record. You got Michael Elsner, who talks about, like, you can license your music. I find this is the most empowering time for musicians that want to make a career and want to do something with it. That's like they're fully capable right now. So many tools at hand. So I think right now what you're doing is just wonderful, and it's just been cool to be a part of it.
Cool, cool. Thank you. Yeah, I agree. It's been we're locked down. We've got all our tools and technologies and laptops and Wi-Fi, and there's
Yeah,
no place to really go. It's like sit home and get back to work. You know.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, and also we're learning the ways to get our music out. It's all the streaming and internet things have been here, but now with the road closed, essentially, we have a different need to just focus on the online streaming stuff and all the ways to make money and sell our music online. So, uh, yeah, there's been a lot of underlying positive things in this thing. So,
yeah.
and plenty of time to practice and learn, practice your guitar and learn new chops.
I completely agree.
That's great. That's great. So, Mike, tell us what your free gift download is going to be for the Summit folks today.
Yeah, so they're going to get a free download of a 3-video series that I had a while ago that is no longer up, and it's the 3 elements. So we talked a little bit about this in our discussion, voicing, but I give specific song examples that I walk through, and then we get into element 2 and 3, which are strumming, and then element 3 and techniques, which I give very specific examples. And I actually work up to a song that was placed in a show in which I use the system, and I talk about how that song was formed using those 3 elements to show people that this is something they can break down for themselves in their own rights as they're starting to write with new artists, or if they're trying to slowly get into that sync licensing world.
That's great. That's great. That's
Yeah.
great. This is really good. So I'm really glad we got a deep dive into songwriting for guitar playing for songwriting. It's really great. So those of you for the summit, please let me know what you saw, what you learned, what do you want to know more of in the Facebook group. Maybe we'll be able to get Mike in to answer some questions and share some more tips. And I'm really curious to see how many of you are using guitars for your sessions, or how many would you use guitars more if you had better chops, or what's going to take to get you off of your GarageBand loops and onto picking up an axe. Please support your local guitar. Just kidding. Use whatever you want. But if you want to use guitars, I'm a guitar player. So,
It's
all
all
right.
good.
So happy to have you here, Mike, for the summit. We'll see you online and see you in the Facebook group. And have a great day practicing with the metronome.
Hey, thank you for having me, man.
Absolutely. Really thrilled to have you. Okay. Where's the stop button? Okay. See you guys.